Hello, Kymani.
Hello.
How are you today?
I'm doing good. You?
I'm good, and I'm very excited to have this conversation with you. Thank you for agreeing to do that with me. I don't know if it's new or not for you.
No, it's nice doing like little engagements like this and talking about the different work that we do and the different experiences that I've had.
So, before people just before we jump into the conversation and the reason why we are sharing this space together, I'm just gonna remind people if it's I don't know if it's their first conversation that they listen for the program, but we are recording this conversation. This conversation is part of the Ready Plus project, which is funded by the Canadian government through a grant that's called Community Service Recovery Fund. And basically, what we're trying to do is find ways to make program and services more accessible to historically underserved community. But really, for us, it's to include everybody or as much people as possible, because people do need support, and sometimes programs are just hard to access for a lot of people for very different reasons that we're going to talk about today, actually. Um, and so our approach is really based on trying to help people just develop the right mindset for to be more inclusive, to a diverse um, communities or diverse people, because we really believe that it's about understanding, having a clearer vision of where to start, not just like having all the information. And we're going to talk about this too, because it's about demystifying the work that needs to be done. But I think it starts by having the right mindset and understanding what the work is and being ready. That's also why we are called Ready Plus, which stands for Racial Equity, Accessibility, Diversity, and Inclusion Plus. Because depending on what you need, you might add words, you might remove words, you might put one before the other. Like also, it needs to be flexible, just like your mind. And today I thought about you for the conversation because I wanted to have a chat about intersectionality, which some people might not know what it is. Worry not, we're going to talk about what it is exactly so you understand. But more specifically, intersectionality in the context of community engagement. Because connecting with communities that you might not belong to, or you might not have a clear understanding of, can be intimidating, but also it's an important moment because you want to be a safe person to connect with communities and not just randomly show up. Usually, historically underserved communities are very guarded about their space and who they let in. Just because if it's their space and they feel safe, it's important for them to have control over who's coming in, really. And I'm sure you get it because we're going to chat about it. Because I thought about you because you are the executive director now of an organization called 10 Oaks Project, and really offer events and activities for queer families and queer youth. More specifically, and maybe more notably, if it's a word, summer camps for queer youth, which is really fun. And yeah, because camp is a fun time. So good.
Yeah.
And so you are used to working with very different, diverse people who have multi-layered identities, which is also something we're going to talk about today. And so I thought you have a lot of experience as to what should be done, the do's and don'ts of community engagement. And I really hope together we can kind of demystify everything around intersectionality and community engagement. Do you want to introduce yourself and maybe say a little more?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Excited for this conversation. So yeah, my name is Kymani. I use any pronouns, and I'm the executive director of a small charity based here in Ottawa called the 10 Oaks Project. As Alice said, we provide programs and services for queer and trans youth and families. So that means youth who identify as queer trans and also the children of queer and trans parents. And we've been around for about 20 years, providing programs not just in Ottawa, but it's sprinkled all over the province of Ontario.
and it's really cool. I'm sure you like it. Do you like it?
Oh, I love it. Yeah, I love it. It's honestly, it's a perfect job for me. I've been working in summer camps and like youth programs my entire life, and Ten Oaks just has such a history of being pushing the envelope and of making more intentional spaces. And the reality is, Ten Oaks was the first of its kind in Canada that provided a recreation camp program for not only queer and trans youth, but queer spawn, so the children of queer and trans parents. And so it's amazing to be part of this like network of people that just provide such a life saving space.
Do you think, like with everything that you described and everything that you do, I think one of the things, first thing that comes to mind is that you are uniquely equipped to do that work, because the way you describe it, first of all, you love it, but also you know a lot about it. You feel comfortable doing it. You have experience. But I can only imagine someone that knows nothing about summer camps, that knows nothing about the community that you serve. Like that work, your role must feel very intimidating.
Yeah,
And when we, like, the reason why I choose the title is because I want to acknowledge that people from the outside, they're like, that's just too much. And in fact, it's not that hard. Like, what do you think about the title? It's not that hard.
yeah, I fully agree. I think it seems very daunting because working with people can be really scary, and I think people are also really afraid to make mistakes. And not being afraid to make mistakes, once you get past that, you realize it's like, I'm going to make mistakes, other people are going to make mistakes, and that's just what it is. Like, working in community can be messy, and you have to like just be comfortable and be understanding that I'm going to make mistakes and I'm going to learn from them and do better. And so like that hard piece, I think, is that fear of like messing up is what like really holds people back and what almost like freezes them from doing anything.
I think you're absolutely right. This is also my experience where people are kind of afraid to mess up. But I think there's a little bit of ego in it. Like they want to do good, they want to do well, and if they're not sure, they're gonna, like, they understand what they're gonna have to do, and they have a, like, they have mastered
Hmm.
what they need to master, just to be able to be not maybe perfect, but not messing up. And I think you're right. People need to be comfortable to mess up, because otherwise it's going to be a very big mountain to climb, even maybe bigger than it really is, because honestly it's not that hard.
It's not. I agree with that.
um, Another aspect of, I think, the what makes it complicated is, well, no, the perception of complicated is mostly because there's people think it's very complex.
Mhm.
We use the word intersectionality, but a lot of people, we get it, so we can throw it around like no problem, and it makes a lot of sense to us. The reason why it makes sense for me, for example, is because I understand what multi-layered identities are. So, and I've been put in situation where when people kind of wanted me to choose between my identities, and it felt extremely uncomfortable. And so I learned through the term intersectionality that I'm a whole person, and I'm allowed to be a whole person at all times. And so intersectionality is basically acknowledging the fact that we are more than one thing, and it impacts our life experience and our existence. For example, I identify as Black, but I'm mixed race. But I grew up mostly in a Caribbean community, so I identify with my Caribbean heritage a lot. So I consider myself Black. I'm queer. I'm a lesbian, and I'm a proud queer person, which for me is more of a political identity, but we're not going to get into this today. I'm also francophone, but people around me are majority, and the majority of people around me speak English and are anglophones. I'm an immigrant also. I grew up in France and I came in Canada a few years ago. I'm a woman. I identify as a woman. So there's different, like, multi-layered identities that I carry and that influence my experience, of course. So that's, for me, that's what intersectionality is. It's also like more real for me than other people. Like how do you how do you define intersectionality like in your life? How would you explain it to other people who are like, what is this term?
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I feel like intersectionality became more known as a word over the last like 4 years for people, but for so many people, who do have multi layers, it's been understood for so long. You think about Sojourner Truth and like "And I'm a Woman," the poem about, you know, I am a woman and I'm black and I'm treated in very specific ways because of my blackness and because of my identity as a woman. And so, yeah, for me, intersectionality is a way of understanding and looking at the world, recognizing that people do have many different identities and the world experiences them in different ways. And so, um, understanding that, it's not a one size fits all. And simply because one person or one group has an experience, even within that group, there are multiple different experiences because of everything that everyone holds. Um, I'm also an immigrant. I came to Canada when I was, just 15, but I only got my permanent residency last year, and so that experience of being an immigrant and having different statuses in my immigrant experience, like being a student and then being, on a work visa, and then going through the process of getting my PR, those all impact me in different ways. And even I went to school in Quebec, and so like Quebec has 2 layers of immigration, and so there's so many different ways that you might experience the world. I'm also queer. Also, yeah, specifically use the word queer because it is political. Um, identify as like gender apathetic, and so sometimes I may be a little bit more femme presenting. Sometimes I may be a little bit more mass presenting. And so how I dress and what my hair looks like will change the way people treat me and the different experiences I have. Also identify as Black. And so recognizing that all of these things, and even some of the things I haven't mentioned about my identity, influence everything: my access to education, my access to work, my, even going to the grocery store to get groceries. Sometimes I can have a different experience as a queer Black person compared to somebody else who maybe doesn't share those similar identities. And so it's just recognizing that the world is going to treat you in very specific ways because of the different elements of your identity.
Is there one aspect of your life that where you experience more pressure or tension because of one of your identity that you're having a hard time like people give you a hard time letting you be a whole person?
Yeah, I think my Blackness is something that people observe, uh, you know, um, more quickly, and so even something like going shopping as a Black person, I know that I'm going to be surveilled. And something simple as like buying clothes at a store, I'm going to have a very different experience than other people. Or even, as a queer Black person, people often just see my Blackness and they might not see different elements of my identity. And so my Blackness is definitely something that I would say has the largest impact in terms of the way the world treats me. Um, and then it just depends on what sort of clothes I'm wearing or what situation I'm in. But yeah, I think because that's just something that people can easily see and easily
Hmm.
connect with, like very quickly. People's brains want to make those easy, quick connections. And so they're like, okay, this sounds like it's right. He looks Black, therefore his pronouns are probably this. He probably has these experiences. He probably
Absolutely.
and so it's like that's what people connect to, I think, quickly.
I like that you seem to have a lot of empathy for people. Like it seems like you understand why they would do that
Mhm.
because this is how the brain works. I think that's something we talk a lot in the project is like at some point we have to acknowledge and consider the fact that the brain works the way that it works. And
Mhm.
like judging the way we react all the time is not constructive. It doesn't take you where you want to go. And it's you're right, like it's a reflex. And in one of our training we talk about masking. but also masking, passing, code switching, all of those things that maybe some people are like, what, too much information. But they're related to the exact same thing. Things are not always what they seem.
Mhm.
And it could be something that you control. I can decide not to share identities that are not visible. There's other things that you can really control, because like visible, and you're visibly Black. That's not something, unless you're on the phone, it's hard to just hide that to people. But some of their identity actually are hidden, and it could be a good thing because you can be safer. It can make you safer in some part of the world. For example, if I walk in the street, no one will know I'm queer unless I say it, I show it. Well, there's clues that shows that, or I'm holding another woman's hand. That might be that might be a clue, an important clue. So yeah, people's brain. This is how it works, and also code switching. Of course, code switching is about like I change myself depending on my environment to fit in and or feel safer or not. Um, so yeah, there's a lot of ways that we can play with identity and people react to our identities. I know that I find it funny, to be honest. Now that I have all the experience, I find it funny when I know people are assuming my sexuality specifically, because I'm what people call straight passing. Passing identities is basically you look like something, so people will assign some like an identity to you. So most people assume that I'm straight. And when through conversation I realized that those people make assumption, I love to throw it in like, oh, my wife, or oh yeah, of course, like and look at people facial expression. But I know it's a privilege that not everybody has. So
yeah, it's interesting seeing, you can see like their brain, like the gears turning as you say something. It's just like, okay, you are taking all of this information in right now. let me give you time to process it.
Yeah, well, we are like the human brain is fascinated, but we have that one specificity as a species, that we have that thought that we can imagine things or we can project things, or so we always like the little mind game where you're like, oh, don't try not imagine a pink elephant, and the first thing that your brain does is imagine a pink elephant. So this is the capacity that we have, but we do that with other human beings, and sometimes it doesn't have any impact, but sometimes it does have an impact.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a good segue, I think, to what we are talking about in our training about community engagement, which is multi-layered stigma. Mm-hmm. Because unfortunately, curing some identities mean you're experiencing life in a different way, but there's more challenging, there's more barriers. There's a negative attached to some identities. Not that they are bad. Actually, some of them are really good, because we can talk about queer joy, which is also an amazing thing. But in society where the norm are, for example, for straight people, so heteronormativity, like structured norm rules are made for straight couples. When we know historically that there's a lot of underserved community who were oppressed. So indigenous communities, what they experienced through time, Black communities, also systemic racism, discriminations, like all of those isms also that are not good for people. Why do you think it's important for people? Like, I don't want to ask you a question because I'd rather have a conversation with you, but I'm really curious to know, like, because you haven't done the training, but I'm telling you, we teach about multi-layer stigma. Why do you think it's important we teach this to help people do better when it comes to community engagement?
I think it's important because it connects to the title, because that stigma people have in their heads, and that's what holds them back, because they're like, well, I'll have to do X, Y, and Z. I'll have to like talk to these people. I'll have to like do this. I'll have to be uncomfortable in a lot of situations. And so talking about the stigma helps it feel more accessible, and help people have like an entrance way into whatever sort of topic that you're going over. So I think it is absolutely necessary, because the stigmas also come up everywhere. They come up in like the media that we consume, in like the conversations that we're having in community, from politicians, from everywhere. These stigmas, these stereotypes that block people from actually engaging with one another, and being able to actually have fulfilling and impactful actions. So yeah, very important to talk about stigma.
Yeah, that's what we think too. We agree with you. um, One of the things, because of your position as a executive director, I know that one interesting aspect of this that's related to multi-layer stigma, it's making sure people feel seen and heard and welcome.
Mhm.
And like one of the aspects that I find interesting in the conversation is that people want to do good. Okay,
Mhm.
people want to do good. They want to help. But when you want to be someone a supporter, if you see just one aspect of someone, and if you address one thing, then you're not really helping, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
So, like, do you have an example of a situation where you felt like just one aspect was addressed, maybe in work, like in your work, in whatever the situation is, one thing was addressed because just one lens was applied, and then so the problem or the things that you weren't addressed were not addressed, or the problem was not fixed, or something it continued, what you were trying to influence and impact continued because of that.
Mhm. Oh yeah, definitely. I think one thing that comes to mind immediately is how we try to talk about disability in the different programs that we run. And so, for example, we have specific activities at the camp programs called centered spaces. And these are specific opportunities for people with shared identities to come together and just talk about whatever it is they want. And so we had a centered space for folks who identified as disabled. Um, and so the disability community, the disabled community is so big. It includes people who have physical disabilities, hidden disabilities, people who have mental health challenges. It is such a large aspect of human beings. And so when we try to just like put everybody in one space, not all their needs are being met. So we have to think about like where physically is the room? Is it accessible? Are there any sort of physical barriers that people might have? They have a mobility aid, a wheelchair, anything like that. Is it far from like wherever place that we are starting off at? Like, do they have to travel very far? What sort of like room is it in? Is there a lot of echo? Are people who like are hard of hearing, are they going to be able to like really be able to participate, or are they going to hear the echo and not be able to like either read lips or anything like that? Are there folks who are maybe neurodivergent and maybe aren't as able to I say this as someone with ADHD. Sometimes,
Mhm.
like people who are neurodiverse aren't always able to like share the space when it comes to like uh, talking and sharing. And so, like, are other people being talked over and maybe not realizing that they aren't providing other people space to share, but they're all disabled. And so, how can we be more intentional about creating a space for folks with these identities? And so, one thing that we've done in the last couple of years was we've had a disability centered space and we've had a neurodiverse centered space. And so all the folks who identify as neurodiverse, whether it's campers and staff, are able to like, get together because sometimes the other disabilities don't really get to talk about their experiences as much because we do have so many folks who are neurodiverse. And so just being more intentional about like, okay, how do we recognize that there are layered identities within this because someone with a mobility aid might not get to share their experiences because other folks may be trying to share their experiences. Similarly, with when we talk about COVID, if folks are wearing a mask, if someone reads lips and is hard of hearing or deaf, are they able to read lips to be able to understand what people are saying? And so, do we have to buy masks that are clear where people can actually read lips, or do people remove their masks at some point so they are able to be heard or be understood by other people? And so that's something very specific that we've had to really figure out in real time and like recognize that we're probably not going to do it right the first time, but we're going to go back and we're going to ask people, how was your experience? What can we do better? What are some things that will make this more accessible for you? And so that's one specific example of trying to, you know, change things up in real time to recognize that people are going to need different things.
I like that how you, because when you started, I'm like, this sounds very complex, Kymani. And we're here to demystify and show people that it's not complex. But the way you shared it at the end, you're like, we realized it was not working. It's just we did it. We had the intention. We knew what our goal was. We did it. We saw that we didn't meet our goals because we addressed one thing, but not everything was addressed. Then we just readjusted and we adapted. And then we had to super spaces. So I'm like, thank you, because it looked complex, but at the end you're like, it's not that hard. You just apply what we share, like about intersectionality. Are people's needs met with the decision that I've made and the intention that I have? And so it made me think about the way to guide what you did. Probably you use your values as a compass. And we do try and teach people that the best way to not get lost is to figure out what value you have in common and focus on this. Like, what would be the value that you were following that got you there?
I think the value I was following was the platinum rule, which is like treat people how they want to be treated. Everyone knows the golden rule, which is like treat people how you want to be treated. But the platinum rule takes it a step further, whereas it recognizes that my needs are probably different than your needs. And so how do I get you the things that you need? How do I recognize that accommodations aren't a one size fit all? And that's what I try to always recognize in the different work that I do and the different experiences that I have. Like, how does this person want to be treated? What are they telling me? And how can I incorporate that into whatever it is that we're doing? And not center myself in those experiences, because it's not all about me. It's about other people. And so how do I recognize that, like, what they need is what they need? So that's a value that I also try to share with other people. And I hope it is also received. I hope people do the same for me. They treat me how I want to be treated, and not necessarily how they want to be treated.
That's good. I didn't know. We're on the same page, but I didn't know about the term platinum rule. I think it's so cool because it makes absolute sense. I think people, and that's something that we are trying to also teach, is that you take the lead other people you want to serve or help or support, because they are the expert. So if you're there to give your own solutions, then why do they need you in the first place? Because it's a different dynamic, and I think taking the lead. So I like the platinum rule. And now we are entering like this so much that I want to say at once, so I'm going to try. I think our brains work similarly, so I'm like, I could ask like 10 questions at the same time and want you to answer. So I'm going to try and start and do one thing at a time. Okay. First, you started with, it might be a bit more technical part of our conversation, because I think we understand something that we want to kind of bring people to, as like you said, we need to respect people's needs and listen to those needs. But sometimes those needs aren't really aligning with each other. Those needs are, what's the word in English? There's like, you cannot meet everybody's needs because some of needs are not compatible, basically.
Yeah, they're conflicting.
You gave the example of COVID and the masks, for example. Like, if you are immunocompromised, or if you're worried that you're going to get a virus, not just COVID, like any virus, and you being in a space mean people need to be mindful of that. But you have that other person who has, we need to read lips, or will be completely excluded from the conversation if they cannot see people's face. I'm thinking people think about hearing like challenges, but there's also any neurodivergency that means that if you don't see people's face, it gives you a lot of anxiety, for example. So when you want to consider everybody's needs, I think people at some point, and I see that a lot, and you see that a lot, like all the time, at some point it feels impossible because not everybody's needs are going to be met. That's just what it is. It's what it means to live in a society when there's togetherness. At some point, being together means we have to compromise on some things. How do you approach healthy boundaries when it comes to meeting everybody's needs?
Yeah, I think that's such a good question. It's so hard because it feels you want to do everything. Like, you want to to have everyone's needs met. So you want to have everyone feel safe and comfortable and secure in whatever sort of program that you're doing or thing that you're running. And so one thing that I try to do is I try to incorporate as many people in the decision making process as possible. So it's not just me, because then it feels like the weight of everything is on me. And so I have to carry it all, which is never the case. Like I need to engage other people who also are knowledgeable into like what sort of decisions need to be made. So definitely reaching out to other people and asking for help and recognizing like where my limitations are, um, and knowing that it's this is not going to break me, like whatever sort of decision that I have to make or that we have to make as a collective, it is not going to break us. Like because it's been done before, most likely. Like people have had to deal with this issue in the past in some sort of way, shape, or form. Um, and B, this is going to make us stronger in the end. So knowing like what the goal is to make as many people feel comfortable as many, recognizing that we won't probably get 100% because people do have these conflicting needs.
Conflicting needs. Thank you.
Yeah,
You find the right way to say it. I was looking for it.
Yeah, and so I really try to recognize that it's not all me. There are people who have done this before or who I can lean on and connect with. And also recognizing that even if someone does have, if their specific need or maybe a part of their need isn't being met and they react in a way that makes me feel bad or, they get angry or something, that it's not necessarily about me. It's about the system that this person has to deal with all the time, whether it be like racism or misogyny or transphobia or anything. This person, I mean, maybe they are mad at me specifically, but also they're frustrated about the way that they have to engage with the world constantly.
Yeah, the way they process information is impacted by how the world is treating them.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm just standing in front of them at that moment in time, and so it's like it's the whole system that they have to constantly deal with, that they are frustrated with, that they're angry with, that they want to push back on constantly. It's not about me. Um, it's about the systems that plague all of us. So yeah, that's what I try to do to keep the boundaries.
It's funny because that's not something that an advice that I thought I would share today, but you're absolutely right. It might not be about you. Because when you experience a lot of discrimination, oppression, microaggression, then it definitely impacts the way you behave, because your brain and your nervous system starts to be on the defensive all the time. So you might then be in front of someone who wants to do good, who wants to support you, and you still behave in a way that is not consistent with that, or doesn't seem to connect with that.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean like I'm not responsible at all, but it does mean that it's like, let me just step back and try to look at this situation fully, and not make it all about me. And so it's like taking what responsibility I can take from this, and not like the whole piece.
Yeah, but it's great. Like let's go a little further in the conversation then, because we're there. It kind of goes back to the beginning, but because it's in everything, like people do experience very negative interactions. They do experience a lot of situation where they're made to feel uncomfortable, not seen, mistreated. And that's just a reality. I don't think that I always want to insist on this. Like we were talking about multi-layer stigma. But it is important because you are going to interact with someone, with people, with a community that you don't understand the experience of. And there's a lot of things that happen in the past. So like for me, I'm going to give you a few examples. Like for me, for example, knowing that people want to connect with the community just because, it looks good. You're an organization, like we apply for funding all the time. And, maybe you're going to apply for funding and that organization really wants to give you money because it looks good. But then you're going to interact with someone from an organization that not necessarily understand the experience, not necessarily understand the work, not necessarily understand what needs to be done. Like there's a lot of unknown. Like, can you think of an organization or a person, a situation where it happened, you had to connect, and you were like, that person, that organization, or that situation made me feel uncomfortable because they don't get our needs. But like, first, they don't get why we would be guarded, what would be on the defensive, and also they don't understand how they need to adjust accordingly.
Mhm. Yeah, I think I'm thinking of one organization that reached out to the Dynamics Project. They reached out in about May, um, specifically wanting to do things for Pride, so June. They wanted to highlight some of the programs that we do. And so my question was, are we the first organization that you're reaching out to for this? Like, do you have a history of engaging with queer and trans communities? Are you simply doing this because it's Pride and you want to have you want to do the performance of being inclusive and accepting? Um, and so slowly through the conversations that we were having, it was clear that this wasn't the case. They didn't have a history of it. I also looked, on their social media accounts to see, like, last year for Pride, did they do anything? No. Okay. Maybe the year before, did they do anything? No. Okay. So this is in the first time in a couple of years where they are wanting to engage with a queer community, um, to talk about Pride. Um, and so just recognizing that they haven't done it historically before, and then therefore they don't necessarily know how to engage with us.
Mhm.
They don't know what sort of safety measures we might put in place, and so they were specifically asking for like photos of participants from our programs that they wanted to share on their accounts. And so that's a safety risk for a lot of us because it
Mm.
might out some people. It might, put people in certain situations that they are now, other people know that they're either queer or trans, or at least part of a space that is for queer or
Mhm.
trans people.
So they can be
Um,
exposed to discrimination, violence. Yeah.
exactly. And so it's just that's a measure where it's like, okay, you don't even know what sort of safety measures we have to put in place, but you're asking for this very, very
Mhm.
specifically from us. And then they were all also asking for like videos, and not knowing the impacts that it might have on our participants.
Mhm.
Um, and so that was just a recent situation that we had where it was like, okay, this isn't a fit. This clearly is not a fit for us because you don't understand the history of experiences that queer and trans people have, the discrimination, and also the current. Like currently, there's so much hateful rhetoric and
Mhm.
violence that is directed towards our communities and specifically like our youth. And so you don't even understand the history or the current reality. Yeah.
And it's happening now. So there's a
Yes.
real, like, you can actually notice the disconnection because it's not like they don't have access to, because some, yeah, there's some part that are historical and you might not be aware. Like a lot of people like to convince themselves that, it's in the past, you know, stop talking about slavery, stop talking about colonization when the impact is still very much like true and around, and have a consequence on everything still. And yeah, so okay, educate yourself about that. But it's now, it's today. So
Yeah. And you're reaching out to us for something around their identities. And so, like,
mhm,
if you don't even know what's happening right now, then you don't understand like what you're asking for us at such a vulnerable time.
mhm.
Um, and so, yeah, it's hard, but
It
it's not that hard.
happens. It happens a lot around pride, though. Now
Oh
that you
yeah,
mention it, because I don't like that conversation is not that happening because of the calendar. So it has
yeah,
nothing to do with pride. But you're right. Like we are getting near the pride season. Pride events are started. Have started already, and there's a lot of what is called for people that might not be interested, but that's what it's called, pink washing. um, that people get interested into, like the LGBTQ. And I'm not saying LGBTQ because that's a that's the acronym. It's because those people usually think that's their acronym, and they're interested in the LGBTQ and what they like, what they need to do to look good. So it's not about how it looks. It's, if you really want to engage with communities, you need to do what exactly you were describing. You need to pay attention, you need to be knowledgeable, you need to understand, and if you don't, like, assess. assess what do you know, why do you want to do this, what don't you know, why you shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah.
So, the pros and the cons for sure.
Yeah. And also, what are you offering? It's Are you offering anything to this community because you're asking for things? And so, like, what
Mhm.
are you willing to offer to them? Um, because you may be asking for something very specific or something that is going to put people in danger or at risk. Um, and so, like, what are you offering? I think it's really important for people to really consider and think about.
What should they have done differently? Like, why would have make you feel, oh yeah, that's a good organization to connect with? Like, honestly, even if they didn't had, like, because you mentioned something, it's about relationship. Like, one of the things that we focus on, and we tell people this is the most important part. If you want to connect, if you need to do community engagement, and you need to lead with relationship building. So not even go to that organization for something specific unless you know it's a reciprocal relationship. Like, you can base it right away on, I want to do this amazing thing for you, and maybe you can do these amazing things for me. But that's, it depends on the context, really. But you should focus on relationship building. So wherever they were in their relationship with the queer community or even your organization, like, what should it have done differently to make it better?
Yeah, I think what would have been good is to reach out earlier. So reach out like before May. I know it's hard because people are busy and just life happens. But maybe reaching out a little bit earlier, because if you're reaching out in May for something in Pride, it's very my brain is telling me that you're only reaching out to us because
Mhm.
next month is Pride. And
Yeah,
so, like, maybe set the space where it doesn't feel as though you're only reaching out to us for this one specific
it's
thing.
opportunistic. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's very clear that this is
Yeah.
why you want to us. And also maintain a relationship. And so, like, are there communications that are happening throughout the year, or some sort of like engagement that is happening, or only reaching out to us during this one period of
Mhm.
time?
It's like Black History Month. It's kind of the same thing.
Exactly,
Mhm.
exactly. And I think, like, lastly, um, explaining more of the context, and like me, I had to like go and see what their experience and what their engagement with queer and trans communities was. But
Mhm.
offering that would have been really beneficial from them, because it's like this. These are the things that we're thinking about doing. These are the things that we've done in the past. Um, because then I wouldn't have to go looking for any sort of context clues or any history. And so, like, setting the stage, um, and yeah, building that relationship, building those dynamics, is just something that wasn't done. They reached out via email. Some a call or like a video call would have been good to like set the stage initially, instead of just like asking for these things via email. Um, to really build that trust and build that understanding that this is what we're doing, and then offer things afterwards. So, like, if this is what we want to do for Pride, what are you doing with us after Pride?
Mhm.
Because we exist outside of June, and we exist outside of the
Yeah.
outside of
You do?
things. Yeah, just for a little bit. But yeah, so like, what else is a relationship going to be, outside of this very very specific thing that they were asking for?
Yeah, they really fail because one of the, like, main, the basic thing you can do is build safety and trust, and they didn't make you feel safe, and they didn't give you a reason why you should trust them. So
Yeah.
that was a big fail. But
Mhm.
hopefully, next time they do better, because you are very generous and you
Yeah.
probably took time to explain that to them and you didn't just say no,
Yeah.
goodbye. So they were lucky to interact with someone so reasonable. Um, like, before I ask, I don't know, should I ask it right now? No, I think I prefer going somewhere right now, and I'll come back. It's it happens with people who want to interact with you and your organization and your community. Um, do you also do that work, with other people, community? Do you feel like also you do things to kind of, do what you preach?
Mhm.
Do you have an example of how you yourself, because I think people think the goal is to get there when it comes to inclusion, and you're like, once I'm going to be here, I'll be good. And it goes back to what we were saying, that people are afraid to mess up and make mistakes. But also, I think it's they have unrealistic expectation as to, I'm going to wait until I'm good, and
Mhm.
when I'm Kymani, I'll be good and I'll do everything right and it's going to be perfect, etc., etc. But what I often share with people, because I speak like multiple languages, when you want to learn to speak another language, people do the same thing. They're trying to wait until they're really good to start and using the language. So they miss everything in between that they could have done to improve themselves, which is practice, even when you're not comfortable, even when you don't feel ready.
Mhm.
So try and be humble for a second. Do you also are still learning? Are you
Oh,
still learning?
1000%. Yeah, yeah, all the time. I'm constantly learning, and I think that's part of what I do to preach what I put action into what I say. Um, the books that I read, the media that I consume, it's often about different communities and different people, and so I can have a better understanding. And listening to podcasts and being like, oh, that is a really interesting part of, say, misogyny, for example. Um, I did not realize that. Um, One thing I also say sometimes, just like if I'm talking to friends or family or anything, I'm often like, you know, clock me if this sounds insert system of oppression. So like clock me if this sounds transphobic, clock me if this sounds like
Mhm.
misogynistic, or if this sounds ableist. Because it's recognizing that I may have all this knowledge about how oppression functions, but also I'm still,
You're
learning in a world where it's like I'm receiving all these things. And so like my
and you're part of
idea,
it. You live. You're part of
exactly,
it.
I'm
Mhm.
in it. And so like
In it.
I
Mhm.
still say things are like transphobic, that are ableist, without knowing it. And so constantly trying to like understand how other people experience the world, is something I try to do every single day, because it's not just like in my work where I'm trying to build community and break down these systems of oppression. It's outside. And so like who am I spending time with outside of work? Am I spending time with people who have different experiences and have different identities? Or is everyone very similar to what I look like and how I identify? Being super intentional and making yourself uncomfortable. Like you were saying, when it comes to languages, you have to immerse yourself. You have to like be in those spaces to be able to understand where the issues might be, where the mistakes might be, and learn. And so like that immersion, is so important to recognizing that, okay, I'm making mistakes here, and maybe these are ways that I can improve. So yeah, I make mistakes all the
Mhm.
time.
Do you do anything specific to stay in that mindset of, because I think that's ideal to be able to say, like, you need people around you who are able to clock you the way you say. Like, you need, of course, you need people who are like, are you serious? Like,
Yeah,
do you hear yourself?
yeah.
It's still very hard to get to a point where you don't get extremely triggered for doing something wrong. Like for you, I know that for, I don't know. I think I was raised to be very open minded. So it's sometimes it's hard for me to understand what you should do to get there.
Mm,
But one way I find is very efficient is to welcome feedback as a gift. Like, oh, this is an opportunity for me to grow. This is an opportunity for me to learn. So this is a good thing. Like focusing on the fact that even if I feel bad, it doesn't mean that what's happening is bad.
yeah.
So there's sometimes a disconnect. Like, do you have something like this to stay in that mindset of, I need to be ready to get the feedback. I need to be comfortable with the feedback, and I need to know how to react to that feedback.
Oh, all the time, all the time. I Feedback is a huge part of all the work that we do. For example, for the Thenlix project, after programs, we write feedback reports. And
Mhm.
so we specifically are developed from surveys from the participants, from the staff, to figure out like where we did well, where we could improve, and like what steps are we taking to like do better in the future. And so that includes like surveys, that includes like interviews with people after, check-ins to be like, hey, this is what we're doing now. How do you feel about this? And so, in terms of what do I do specifically, I try not to react to things initially. I try to like give a little bit of space. And so, if I, for example, if I receive an email, I'm not going to respond to it as soon as I get it.
Mhm.
The desire might be there to like respond immediately, but I'm gonna like let it sit a little while and let
Yeah.
it, because it might be something that does feel very bad to me. That does feel like, oh, I need to respond to this so they understand that it was a mistake, that I care, that it wasn't my intention. But let me maybe just sit with it for a little while and try to understand my actual feelings around it. Because one emotion that is so accessible to us is anger, and so I
Mhm.
might I might respond initially very very angrily or like with anger, and so trying to like you know either give it a couple hours or even like 24 hours. Like
Mhm.
maybe let, unless the email is urgent, let it sit for 24 hours, because then like you'll have some time, you'll sleep, hopefully you'll eat, you'll drink water, you'll take care of the needs that your body needs, and then come back to it maybe with a different set of eyes. Um, and so that's something I always try to do, like let something sit for a little while and then respond to it. Don't respond immediately, because it might not be actually how you want to respond in the end.
Yeah, give it some time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
You jumped ahead to what I wanted to ask after, because
Uh-huh.
I was going to ask, and as an organization or has like a program, how do you get feedback? How do you receive feedback? But you explained very eloquently that you need people to improve. You need other people feedback. We have a choice, and to know if you're doing things right. Obviously, well, not for everybody, obviously, but I think this is a very good idea. We invite people to get feedback and to ask for feedback
Mhm. It's
when you want
absolutely
to do
necessary.
something.
Yeah. And you have to also know that the feedback, there is going to be a percentage of it that is going to feel negative.
Hmm.
Um, and so be preparing yourself to deal with, not everyone's going to love it. Everyone's going to have like their own specific opinions. And so preparing yourself when you're doing these surveys or interviews and knowing that, okay, I'm gonna probably read some things that feel like it's directed at me or directed at specific things that I done, and maybe it even is. And so, what do I need to do to prepare my mind, prepare my body to receive these things?
Yeah, I agree. I agree. It's harder than it sounds, though. I know that this is one part where we're very reactive,
Mhm.
and so we're not always in control. So not judging the way we think, the way we react, but show like follow your advice and just give it some time, because you don't know. Especially lately, I tell my kids like I'm trying not to make decision when I'm angry, because otherwise I tend to regret them.
Mhm.
So the other day, my daughter did something wrong. She was like, "Oh, I'm sure you're gonna say that I cannot do this or do that." And I told her, I'm not making decision when I'm frustrated and angry, because I don't know if I'm gonna feel that way in an hour. So let's talk about this later. And it went well. It worked. So
Yeah, yeah. Just letting it sit, like sitting with your emotions. Because also, is your body getting the things that you need? Like, have you drank water that day? Did you eat? And so, like, so did you sleep well enough? And so maybe the anger is also coming from not getting the things that your body actually needs, um, to be able to make these decisions. So yeah, letting it sit is something that's necessary.
that's interesting. That's interesting, and it's just interesting thing to add. I didn't think about that, but yeah. And because we're talking about community engagement, maybe we won't go to it. But I'm interested. Maybe next time.
Yeah.
um, I think we've been chatting for a while already, and we had a great conversation. So we're almost, I think, ready to say goodbye. Unfortunately, already time flies for sure. But just to make sure people get the most of this conversation and kind of remind ourselves why we were here today, really wanted together to have a conversation about like demystifying what it is to work with many different communities, but especially the ones who carry the most identities. So the ones who have multi-layered communities. So our community, for example, who are like queer and racialized people, or you got the neurodivergency, like all of those things. And so the more identities, of course, the more complex it appears. But really, it's not that hard. It's not that hard because it's about flexibility, it's about open-mindedness, it's about like being intentional with how you build a relationship, understanding that you need that reciprocal relationship where you're not only taking, you're also giving. um, just being ready to build something that's more positive. For you, what a good collaboration looks like? What a good doing community engagement well, like what does it look like for your organization, maybe for yourself? Like what do you do well at, you think, to connect, and what the other people have done well to connect in return?
Yeah, I think one thing that I try to do uh, in terms of collaboration is showing up when it's needed, and it's not always when it necessarily benefits like the organization. So when it benefits the town's project or when it benefits me, but like showing up when it's just asked. When people are saying like, "Hey, we need people to come out to this event, to this like demonstration. We need people here, or we need like people at the tables. We need this." Showing up is very, very important because it shows that you are invested. You're not just here for yourself. You want to be immersed and you want to like just give and try to be supportive. And so showing up to places is really, really important. Um, I think also reaching out when people might need it. So like if you know someone is struggling, not even reaching out and be like, "Hey, I know there's a lot going on. You don't have to respond to this, but like just know thinking of you or like here for you if you need it." Um, that I don't think people understand really how like far something like that can go. Like a simple text message or something like that is really, really supportive, and it shows that you are caring and that you are invested in the relationship. Um, yeah, I think just like reaching out with those things that like, "Hey, you don't have to respond to this," or like, "Hey, you don't have to necessarily like respond to this now or anytime." Like, there's no pressure at
Hmm.
all to this. Setting that space, setting that intention, I think is really important.
It's
Um,
not a given, like you're
yeah,
you're just offering.
exactly. That recognizing the expectation that people might feel.
Hmm.
Um, and I think also in terms of collaboration, um, I really try to speak to as many people as possible. And so if I'm at an event or if I'm at some sort of like conference, just like saying hi to people, like trying to engage with them. I think sometimes, especially after quarantine and all the experience that we
Hmm.
had, it's like hard to engage with people sometimes, and it
Yeah.
it, it makes you uncomfortable, and trying to just say hi or introduce yourself can make you really, really feel a certain level of anxiety. But just being like, "Hey, this is my name, this is what I do," or whatever, something like that, I think can really go far, especially for people who like may be new to the community or may not know others people's intentions. And so like putting yourself out there and just being nice to people and knowing that people want to receive kindness, I think can go really far.
It's intimidating though, the way you it's intimidating, but also like you gave good advice, and like the platinum rule is interesting because if you focus on other people's needs and really trying to get them to understand them without judgment, I think it goes a long way, in my opinion.
Yeah, that I was talking to a coworker over the weekend, and one thing that they were saying was they've been really intentional over the last year when it comes to interacting with people, and they're trying to lead with empathy and
Hmm.
understanding that this person may have these decisions. So let me not judge this person. Let me
Hmm.
just try to understand where they might be coming from. Lead with that understanding that there might be other things going on. There might be other stressors. There might be, maybe they went to some sort of like appointment and experienced like transphobia or racism or homophobia, and maybe this is impacting the interaction that we're having right now. So leading with that empathy, and then moving into the conversation, I think can really, really help and really be, it can change everything.
It's
The whole,
interesting. It's interesting you would say that because one principle that we base our project on is not empathy, because we had that conversation about empathy and the importance, and I think it's so obvious that it's needed everywhere, at all times. But sometimes it's hard for people to act on
Yeah.
their empathy, you know. And so we teach something more like what we call practical empathy, which is having empathy, but also building an understanding of other people's perspective. Because your empathy, if you keep your empathy with your own perception, it gets harder to relate to other people. But if you are empathic, but then you are intentionally trying to understand other people's perspective, then you are doing, like, you are actually using and making something useful of your empathy. So
Yeah.
I think empathy is good, but it's always missing, because empathy can be negative. Like,
True.
it's weird enough. You have a healthy empathy, you have toxic empathy. Like, you are there's a wrong way to use your empathy, actually. So I like the
Totally.
fact that that person shared, I'm trying to be intentional, and my empathy leads me to try to understand others better.
Yeah.
But there's so much more to say, but it's another entire conversation. Like, similarly to what they or he is doing well, uh, that person chose that practice and identify it as something that's helpful. Have you interacted with other organizations that did things well? You were like, this is the right way to engage. This is the right way to connect. They did things right. And what did they do?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think um, one organization that I recently dealt with, one thing that they did really well was they recognized that there was an issue that happened. There was a huge mistake that, you know, it was something that impacted a lot of people in the community. And the mistake was like very, very private, sorry, public. It was like,
Mhm.
it was online. And so like, it was very clear that like people in the community knew about it. And so one thing that I really appreciate in terms of how this organization dealt with it was reaching out, taking accountability and being like, this is what we did. How can we work together to improve it? And so like be reaching out with that humility, recognizing that, hey, we messed up. This was a huge issue. What would you like to see as a result of this? What would make you feel comfortable? What would you like to receive in terms of care? And how can we actually make that a reality? Um,
Mhm.
so reaching out and like taking that accountability and then taking action after that, it was absolutely necessary. And so I appreciate this organization so much for those specific steps because it showed that, you know, learning in public is really difficult. It is messy, it is scary, um, but it shows so much courage and so much bravery to admit that you have done something wrong in public.
Mhm.
I often say like if you do something that if you call someone out publicly, you also need to apologize publicly to them as well.
Mhm.
If you do something that impacts people publicly, you need to like apologize in a public way
Mhm.
because it needs to be just as loud.
Mhm.
And so this organization really recognized that like we have to be just as loud in both of these spaces because it shows that we are not going to pretend that we're perfect and that we don't make any issues or any mistakes. And so I think that accountability, that humility, is something that I want all people to do moving forward. Like, and something that I really
Mhm.
try to do as well. Like recognizing that when I make mistakes or do things that harm people, um, I really try to apologize and then be intentional about what am I doing afterwards for that to never happen again. Um, I think that's just such an important thing, and it's scary for a lot of organizations and a lot of people
Yes.
to admit things publicly like that.
For many different
Um,
reasons, but yeah.
yeah, exactly, and I get that. I fully understand that, but I think that part of community, part of engaging with community, is that recognition that we're not going to be perfect. There's no way we can be perfect, and so if more people are recognizing that perfection does not exist, I think it
Mhm.
makes it easier. It builds that trust. It really, really
Yeah.
does build that foundation of trust because then people can come to you, be more open with you when you're more open with them.
because it's not because it seems hard that you shouldn't be doing it, because at the end of the day, just like this conversation, you might figure out at the end that it's not that hard at the end of the day.
Yeah.
It looked like it was hard, but when you
Yeah.
did it and you did it well and you followed the basic principles and advice, then at the end of the day it wasn't that hard. And I love that you mentioned something very important in everything in life. It's like accountability, and that's something I think we're
Yeah.
lacking. So it's a good thing that we can finish with this little nugget of, be accountable. It's good. And
Yeah.
just before we end that conversation, I'm very sad that it's already happening, like we're there, but let's leave people with something like to think about.
Mhm.
What would be, for when it comes to community engagement, connecting and community engagement? So we're clear and we're at the end, so maybe we should have been clearer before, but it means that you're connecting with a group, you're connecting with an organization, you're connecting with a collective. So it's identities that are kind of put together. And so you can make some generality. It's okay. Because you can understand the experience of Black people, because there's an experience like anti-Black racism is a thing. So it's okay. So in when it comes to community engagement, it's okay to make some generality. So I'm going to ask you, maybe if you have anything to share, what would be one absolute red flag when someone wants to connect with your organization that would be like a deal breaker? What would be a green flag where you're like, yeah, there's potential here?
Mhm. Cool, that's a good question. Um, a red flag would definitely be um, a red flag. Let me think. Let me think on it a little bit. I think a red flag would definitely be if people are only reaching out like with what they want, um, only asking and not offering anything. That is an enormous red flag, um, and it's a red flag for multiple reasons because it shows that like they don't actually care. They just like want to take. It feels
Mm-hmm.
very like very colonial to just like very extractive.
Mm-hmm.
That is a huge flag, red flag when people are just like asking and not offering anything. Um, so I really try to stay away from that. And I think a green flag would be when people are one thing that sometimes happens with as a queer person, as a Black person, people will like get tripped up on their words, and so they might say like LGBT instead of like to us LGBTQ, or they might not. People often like also get confused around pronouns. Like I go by any pronouns, and so people will say things like guys and then like apologize because they feel like they're misgendering me. So I think one green flag is that when if people do something like that, they apologize and then they keep it going. They don't like apologize profusely and keep the apology going and oh I'm so sorry and then follow up with multiple emails about how they made this mistake. They recognize that something went wrong and then they just act differently moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that is a huge green flag because the red flag would be like keeping the apology going because it's like well now we can't even talk about what we actually wanted to talk about because it's become about you. It's because
Mm-hmm.
about you and how you feel and that guilt and that shame. Um, so yeah, that's definitely a green flag. Like apologizing and moving forward.
Awesome. Well, that's the best way I think to end the conversation, because that's exactly it. Just apologize and move on. That's, yeah. If anyone listening to this at some point, you will hopefully you do that. That's a green flag. Work on it. Thank you for your time, Kymani. Thank you for your generosity and being like willing to share your experience with me. I hope the conversation was as good for you that it was for me. I know for both of us, we didn't learn much because we know those things, but this is so good, I think, for people to have access to that we're sharing that space with other people so they can have a better understanding and really demystifying the word. Like we've said it before. I'm saying it again just to finish the conversation. It's not that hard. It's not that hard. Just start somewhere and just do it.
Yeah, exactly. Just do it. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. This was a great conversation, and yeah, it's always great to talk about community and to talk with you, Alice. It's important work that y'all are doing, and I'm excited to see these afterwards.
Thanks again, Kymani. Bye.